I'm Noel Ann. Technically, I have an operating title of priestess, and I am an ordained non denominational Christian minister. I technically own and operate a church, although we do not have a physical building at the moment. I have a dozen and a half full length sermons underneath my belt, several college certificates, um, as well as a certification to perform exorcisms. The I am currently on a hiatus from church work for a mix of mental health, spiritual growth, as well as pursuing personal education reasons, also financial reasons. I'm trying to currently secure a much more stable housing situation, as well as potentially find a building to rent out to actually have a formal church building space. Um, Anyone else that knows about my history knows the fact that I am an ordained Christian minister, knows the fact that I was raised in a heretical Pentecostal cult. I also spent some time going to a very traditionally speaking, would be considered a contemporary evangelical Protestant church. And then when I wasn't there, the church that I went to was a heretical cult. And I want to talk about how um, people talk about getting in touch with your roots. People talk about getting in touch with your culture. And, the first church I ever went to post transition, as anyone else who knows me from following my page knows that I am an MTF trans woman, um, knows that the first church I attended was called Edmonds Lutheran Church post transition. And that's because I knew that they had pride flags on their church building that was the last Pride season. Um, they had pride flags all over their building. And so I thought, okay, hey, maybe they're at the very least an accepting church. And I know that ELCA Lutherans, which is what denomination they belong to, but I didn't know they belonged to that denomination, are an affirming denomination. Um, I contacted the pastor though. I pulled his email up from their church's information. I emailed him and told him a little bit of my background, and I was like, "Hey, I'm just really nervous about going back to church, but I wanted to check out your church." He told me I'd be more than welcome. I went. It was a great time. It was very, very healing for me. Then I stepped away. I hadn't had time to actually physically attend. I attended some online sermons, and then because they live stream their church services on Facebook. And yeah, I was there for a while, just to give you some of that backstory. Um, then during this hiatus that I've had no actual formal church exposure during the hiatus. I have not attended any churches, which had left me feeling very spiritually unfulfilled. I still consumed an insane amount of seminary studies, an insane amount of like theologically based content, um, but that doesn't substitute for actually attending church. Um, the other thing is I realized, and I was watching a person who, he's not an affirming Christian, but he runs a very prominent Christian YouTube channel, and his name is Redeemed Zoomer. Um, and he talks a lot about, embracing the old traditions, making sure you're properly baptized, stuff like that. And though I have a lot of disagreements with him, I have a deep, vehement respect for his knowledge, as well as the fact that he is not hateful in a lot of what he talks about, at least so far. And the fact that he genuinely believes in what he talks about when he talks about embracing church tradition. Now, again, I vehemently will argue with anyone who says that you cannot be affirming as a Christian and who says that you cannot be queer as a Christian. Um, but one thing I will say though is it did make me realize that given I was raised in a literal heretical cult, I had never been formally baptized. I was an unbaptized believer. Um, and that started to really bother me. I started to be like, hey, like, started feeling kind of phony. Even though it's not, I don't necessarily think that you're like phony. Um, but yeah, and so I reached out to Edmonds Lutheran Church. I called a couple different churches. I called a Baptist church, and then I realized that they were a King James only denomination. Which, if you're a King James only denomination, you're not affirming, like 90,000% of the time. um, and yeah, so I contacted Edmonds Lutheran Church again. I talked to him. We had a great meeting, great sit down. And then on the 9th, if you've seen some of my most recent videos, I got baptized. And I'm extremely, extremely happy to have had that experience and to fully, formally be consecrated as a Christian. even though I've always been a true believer. I was raised as a true believer, even though I was raised in a cult. I always believed, in accepting Jesus, all that. We believed in the 66 book canon, as I still do. I am still a Protestant, but that was something, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in this video, uh, the thought of getting in touch with your roots. Um, Attending a Lutheran church has been incredibly fulfilling for me, but it has also been incredibly, uh, like, knowledgeable for me. It's been incredibly educational for me on the roots of Protestantism. I've always identified as a Protestant. Um, and Lutherans, as you know, is one of, if not the oldest branches of Protestantism. They literally stemmed from Martin Luther, who was one of the founding fathers of the Protestant Reformation movement. Um, and if you see this photo behind me, that is a formal, like, actual staged setup, sacred, like, altar space with prayer candles, the whole wazoo. I had a little formal banner up there with my name and the date of my baptism on there. I had a whole, like, formal ceremony and everything. And I took actual formal communion, not like the metaphorical communion that a lot of Protestant churches do. Um, and it made me realize genuinely that I really have a value for this liturgical process, and I've started to incorporate some of these on my church's website, update it like, hey, we're going to have this as a listing of what we consider baptism. We're going to incorporate communion. We're going to do stuff like that. Um, and I started to really feel like this very refreshed energy. The singing of the hymns that they were singing, a lot of people would equate that to something that's boring or dull, and I actually found it very, like, extremely beautiful. And the actual audio that you hear on the internet when you watch their videos from Edmonds Lutheran Church does not do it justice. The acoustics inside the actual church walls are insane. It is a genuine, beautiful experience when you're hearing them singing while the piano's playing in the background. And back to that redeemed Zoomer guy that I was talking about, one joke that he talks about is he says one thing he's jealous of the Lutherans for is that they have the best music out of the Protestants. And I would say that's probably true. They have a long storied history of music. I believe both Bach and Mozart, both of them were Lutherans. Um, if not, then it was Bach and Beethoven. One of those people, as well as Bach, were raised Lutherans. Um, but I felt in the presence when they were singing "Wade in the Water," when they were singing that song, and they were chanting the prayer of accepting a new member of the church via baptism, because I am an official member of that church now, and I do plan on attending it while I'm on this hiatus, as I said. Um, I felt what's probably got to be akin to what certain Native Americans feel when they're inside of an actual drum circle, or when they're in a sweat lodge. Um, and I am not Native American. I used to think I was. I was told I was, and then I got my DNA tested, and it turned out that I was actually, the amount of Native I thought I was Italian. And if you know about that, like, racist 1970s commercial, the guy they used to play the Native American was actually an Italian man. So that's where any of the characteristics I thought were Native characteristics actually come from. It's from Italy. But that whole getting in touch with your roots thing, I feel like I really am getting in touch with my actual roots, not the contemporary churches getting up and saying, oh, in Jesus' name, blah, 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 and then they, do all these kind of show out things, right? But, like, the actual, like, sacred scriptural readings of sola scriptura, and the actual lighting of ceremonial candles, and the actual formal form of baptisms, it's very, like, beautiful, and it's been quite satisfying. Just wanted to give you that update on it. The going back to the old mainline churches is something a lot of people should do. A lot of the old mainline churches also completely affirming denominations with LGBTQ people. So if you're curious about that. Also, yet again, before I sign off, happy Pride. God bless, and walk in